Picture this. A glassy suburban lake at dawn, the kind of peaceful scene real estate ads drool over, suddenly shattered by a megaphone screech that could curdle milk. You think that rusty fence makes you untouchable, sweetheart? I've crushed bigger men before my morning latte. The voice belonged to Meredith Langford, president of Silver Lake Estates for 15 glorious, iron-fisted years. She stood on the public dock in her signature pastel blue power suit, platinum hair helmeted into submission, flanked by two sheriff's cruisers whose lights flashed like paparazzi at a scandal. Behind her, half the neighborhood had gathered with phones up, ready to film what they were sure would be my public execution. I sat in my battered kayak, paddle dripping, calm as a man who'd already won. My thumb had hit record the second her lips parted. Because what Meredith Langford and her little empire of clipboard warriors didn't know was that I'd been waiting 18 months for this exact circus. And 8,000 volts of perfectly legal, agriculture-approved electricity were about to become the punchline. 4 months earlier my beat-up 2009 F-150 had rolled down the same gravel lane leading to the overgrown lot my late brother Kyle had left me in his will. The truck bed was stacked with survey gear, old topo maps, and a tin box of metals that had seen more sand than most people see in a lifetime. I stepped out, boots crunching on pine needles, and stared at the 3 McMansions that had somehow sprouted on land that had belonged to the Harlan family since 1954. A shiny HOA sign at the entrance read, Silver Lake Estates, where community comes first. Community apparently now included stealing dead men's property. Meredith arrived on day 3 in a white Range Rover that probably cost more than my entire military pension. She clicked across the grass like she owned the oxygen itself. 2 assistants trailing with clipboards and 1 polo shirt goon from Langford Property Management. "Oh dear," she cooed, voice dripping artificial honey. "I heard someone was tidying up the old eyesore lot. I didn't expect it to be poor Kyle's little brother." She said little brother, the way people say tax audit. I didn't offer my hand. She didn't seem to notice. "Listen, Mr. Harlan," she continued, waving a thick folder like a royal decree. "This parcel was officially absorbed into Silver Lake Estates 18 months ago under our abandoned property clause. We have paperwork. We have lawyers. We have 14 years of precedent-crushing people who refused to play nice." She flashed a smile sharp enough to slice drywall. "My generous offer? $50,000, sign away your claim and we all pretend this never happened. Refuse and my legal team will make the next decade of your life a very expensive game of whack-a-mole." She checked her diamond-studded watch. 7 days, darling. After that, the sheriff will help you pack." I watched her convoy disappear in a cloud of dust that smelled like entitlement and overpriced perfume. Then I did what any former perimeter defense specialist would do. I drove straight to the county recorder's office before they even opened. The clerk, a no-nonsense woman named Marlene who'd been there since the Carter administration, pulled up the file and frowned. 2 entries for this parcel. Original 1954 deed, Harlan family, continuous ownership. Then a sudden abandonment transfer dated 3 months after your brother Kyle passed. She turned the monitor. There at the bottom was a signature, Kyle Harlan. Kyle had died in a construction accident 4 months before that document was supposedly notarized. Marlene's voice dropped. Notary was Leonard Whitmore. Retired 6 years ago. Died last spring. A dead man had notarized a dead man's signature transferring my land to the living. Federal forgery. I photographed every page, heart steady as a rifle scope. That same afternoon I found something even juicier in the old county maps. The private lake the HOA bragged about in every brochure? It had been designated a federal wetland and timber transport corridor in 1892. Never delisted. Every dock, boathouse and multimillion-dollar mansion built within 15 feet of the waterline was sitting on protected federal land without a single Army Corps permit. For the first time since Kyle's funeral I smiled. The harassment started small, the way these people always begin, death by 1,000 ridiculous fines. Fluorescent orange envelope number 1. Vehicle parked in unapproved location. $75. My truck was on my own dirt. Envelope 2. Unsightly fence posts disrupting community aesthetic. $150. The posts had been there since Eisenhower. Envelope 3. Failure to obtain temporary residency permit. $300. Residency permit on land my family owned longer than their precious subdivision had existed. Day 7 my phone rang. Meredith's voice was pure ice. Deadline's up, Mr. Harlan. Eviction papers are being filed. Hope you enjoy sleeping in that rusty truck. Oh, and that little kayak of yours? Violation of Lake Use Code 4B. Another $200. I hung up without a word. That night I drove 30 miles to an agricultural co-op and loaded the truck with pressure-treated cedar posts, high-tensile livestock wire, a solar fence charger rated for 8,000 volts, infrared cameras, and bright yellow high-voltage, private property signs. The old farmer behind the counter raised an eyebrow. Cattle fence or HOA fence? I laid cash on the counter. Both. For 3 straight days I worked sunrise to starlight, driving posts 3 feet deep with military precision, stretching wire so tight it sang in the breeze. Cameras covered every angle. Signs went up every 10 feet. When I flipped the solar switch, the low hum that rolled down the fence line felt like the land itself waking up and cracking its knuckles. 8,000 volts. Enough to sting like hell and leave a story, not enough to kill. Perfectly legal under Texas agricultural statutes. I stepped back, wiped sweat from my eyes, and stared at the glowing mansions across the water. You people think rules are for everyone else, I muttered. Time to learn where your rules end. The first test came at 1:47 a.m. 11 days later. My phone buzzed, motion alert. Infrared footage showed 2 figures in Langford Property Management polos creeping along the fence with bolt cutters. I recognized them instantly, Meredith's personal goons. One knelt, snipped, and the decoy section I'd rigged exploded in a cloud of neon orange marking powder. Screams split the night. One man slipped, face-planting into the grass now decorated like a crime scene clown car. The other dropped the cutters and ran, leaving glowing orange footprints like a cartoon villain. I saved the video in triplicate and emailed it to myself with the subject line "Trespassing Evidence." Timestamped. Sheriff Ruiz showed up at dawn looking like a man who'd already had 3 coffees and 0 patience. I handed him the tablet. He watched the orange explosion, whistled low, and shook his head. That's not just trespassing, son. That's attempted criminal mischief. Want me to file? Everything documented, I said quietly. Everything. 3 days later a black Escalade rolled up. Out stepped Reginald Langford, Meredith's husband, owner of Langford Property Management. In a suit so expensive it probably had its own zip code. He carried a briefcase and the smug smile of a man used to buying problems away. Mr. Harlan, he began smoothly, my wife can be enthusiastic. Allow me to offer a cleaner resolution. The briefcase opened. A check for $150,000. Cash, no taxes, sign the quitclaim, and we forget this ever happened. I pressed record in my jacket pocket. And if I refuse? Reginald's smile never reached his eyes. Then the complaints keep coming, safety violations, environmental citations, noise ordinances. You'll grow old in courtrooms, Mr. Harlan. And you'll still lose. I let the silence stretch just long enough. Mr. Langford, are you aware this entire lakefront is federal wetland under the 1892 designation? Every mansion you built requires Army Corps permits you never obtained. He blinked. I continued, voice calm. And forging a dead man's signature on a notarized document? That's 25 years federal time. Maximum. Reginald's face went the color of old oatmeal. He snatched the briefcase and stormed off, but not before snarling. You just made the worst mistake of your life. I stopped the recording. 7 minutes and 42 seconds of pure gold. After that I knew they'd come harder. I doubled the signs, upgraded the charger, and let the fence hum its quiet warning day and night. Neighbors started calling me the electric cowboy. Meredith's next move was pure theater. At 7:23 a.m., her white Range Rover led a convoy, black SUV full of lawyers and a local news van. Meredith stepped out, megaphone in hand, pastel suit gleaming. Mr. Harlan, your dangerous electrical device is endangering the entire community. Remove it immediately or face arrest. The TV reporter, a sharp woman named Lila Vargas, stepped forward. Mrs. Langford, Mr. Harlan has county records showing his property was never legally part of your HOA care to comment on the abandonment document signed 3 months after Kyle Harlan's death. Meredith's mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish on a dock. The cameras rolled. The neighbors who'd been filming her victories suddenly turned their phones on her. I looked straight into the lens. I'll see them in court. The segment aired that night. By morning my inbox was flooded with messages from other homeowners who'd been crushed by the same machine. But the real cavalry arrived a week later in the form of an old Ford F-250 and Thaddeus Crenshaw, the fiercest federal law attorney in 3 counties. He took one look at my evidence pile and grinned like a shark. This isn't a lawsuit, son. This is a public execution. We spent 3 weeks turning my old cabin into a war room. Original 1954 deed. Federal wetland maps. Sheriff reports. The orange powder video. The security guard shock footage. Reginald's bribery recording. And the killing blow. Proof that the insurance company that denied Kyle's death claim was a Langford subsidiary. Kyle hadn't died because he was careless. He died because he'd started asking questions about the illegal lakefront construction. The morning of the trial, the courtroom smelled like fear and expensive cologne. Meredith sat at the defense table in her pastel armor, but the cracks were showing, makeup a shade too thick, eyes darting. Reginald looked like he'd aged 10 years. Their lawyers shuffled papers with the energy of men rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Judge Elena Morales didn't waste time. When Thaddeus played the videos, the courtroom actually laughed out loud at the orange powder explosion and the security guard's cartoonish yelp. When the bribery audio filled the room, Meredith's face went the color of spoiled milk. Then Thaddeus dropped the federal wetland bomb. Gasps rippled like a shockwave. Judge Morales's gavel came down like Judgment Day. HOA claims dismissed. Property confirmed as Mr. Harlan's. $135,000 in damages. All documents forwarded to the U.S. Attorney for forgery and the Army Corps for immediate demolition orders. Meredith's empire didn't just crumble. It exploded in real time. Federal agents swarmed Silver Lake estates within 2 weeks. The 3 illegal mansions were slated for demolition at the owner's expense. Meredith was indicted on forgery and conspiracy. Reginald got bribery plus manslaughter-related charges tied to Kyle's death. Both went to federal prison. The HOA held an emergency vote and dissolved itself in a 94% landslide. Residents couldn't distance themselves fast enough from the brand now synonymous with fraud. 6 months later I stood on the same shore at dawn, scattering wildflower seeds along the waterline where Kyle and I used to fish as kids. The fence still hummed behind me, its low song the sound of boundaries finally respected. A little boy walking with his dad pointed and whispered, "Is that the electric cowboy?" His dad smiled at me. "Sure is, son." The boy looked up with wide eyes. "Did you really shock the whole neighborhood?" I crouched down. "Nah, kid. I just reminded them where the neighborhood ends." That evening I sat on the restored cabin porch, moonlight silvering the lake, and opened my laptop. The Fence Line Network, my new nonprofit, had already helped 37 families fight HOA overreach. We weren't against homeowners associations. We were against people who thought they could steal what wasn't theirs. Some fences aren't built with wood or wire. They're built with truth, patience, and just enough electricity to make the message stick. And some boundaries once defended never fall again. So tell me, was the electric fence too far? Or was the real crime letting people like Meredith Langford think the rules never applied to them? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. The weeks after the verdict felt like watching a slow-motion car wreck in reverse. Except this time the car was Meredith Langford's entire carefully curated life and the wreck was glorious. Federal investigators in windbreakers and serious expressions spent 3 full days measuring distances from the lake, photographing every illegal dock piling, and interviewing residents who suddenly remembered they'd always had concerns about the Langfords. One by one, the luxury homeowners who'd paid top dollar for exclusive waterfront living learned they'd have to pay even more to demolish the very houses they'd bragged about at cocktail parties. Meredith's criminal trial was a three-ring circus of karmic poetry. The jury took less than 90 minutes to convict her on all counts. During sentencing, the court-appointed psychiatrist described her as suffering from narcissistic delusion of governmental authority, which basically meant she'd spent 15 years believing her HOA president title came with its own constitution. The judge gave her 18 months in federal prison and 3 years probation. She left the courtroom in handcuffs, still wearing the same pastel blue suit, now looking 2 sizes too big. Reginald's trial was shorter and meaner. The bribery recording played on loop. Then the prosecutor tied the insurance denial directly to Kyle's death. Safety reports buried, protocols ignored, all to protect the Langford bottom line. 2 years. Their property management company filed bankruptcy 6 months later. Clients fled like rats from a sinking yacht. The HOA itself held its final pathetic meeting in the community clubhouse that still smelled like Meredith's signature lavender air freshener. The motion to dissolve passed so fast the secretary barely had time to record the vote. Residents who'd once nodded along to her ridiculous rules now couldn't post for sale signs fast enough. One former board member was caught on a Ring camera telling a realtor, "Just don't mention we were ever part of Silver Lake Estates. Google is forever." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The fence kept humming, the cameras kept rolling, and every new violation notice that arrived in my mailbox went straight into the growing evidence for the next idiot folder. But the real reward came in the letters. People from neighboring subdivisions started writing. Families fined for flying the American flag on the wrong day. Retirees threatened with liens because their rose bushes were too red. Young couples nearly bankrupted by aesthetic violation fees for painting their front door the wrong shade of beige. I read every story, forwarded them to Thaddeus, and the fence line network grew. We won 39 of our first 47 cases. The ones we settled still left the families with their homes and their dignity. One afternoon, a young woman showed up at my gate holding a toddler on her hip. Her eyes were red from crying. They told me if I didn't pay the $3,000 fine for my child's swing set, I'd lose my house. "I saw your story on the news." I didn't know who else to ask. I opened the gate. "Swing set still up?" She nodded. "Good," I said. "Let's keep it that way." Thaddeus and I had the case dismissed in 6 weeks. The HOA in her neighborhood quietly dropped the fine and rewrote their bylaws after the judge threatened to send their entire board to the same federal facility Meredith now called home. The woman sent me a photo a month later, her little girl laughing on that same swing set, American flag waving proudly from the porch. No fine in sight. That picture still sits on my desk next to Kyle's old fishing photo. The fence itself became local legend. Kids on bikes would ride by just to hear the low electric hum. Teenagers dared each other to get within 10 feet. Nobody ever touched it twice. Even the sheriff started waving when he drove past. "Still legal, Harlan?" he'd call out the window. "Still legal, Sheriff," I'd answer, and we'd both grin. One crisp October evening, I walked down to the water with a small wooden box. Inside were wildflower seeds, the same kind Kyle and I used to scatter every spring when we were boys. I knelt and let them fall into the soft earth along the shoreline. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of cedar and lake water and something that felt a lot like peace. "I couldn't bring you back," I whispered to the quiet. "But I brought your land back. And I made sure nobody else loses theirs the same way." The fence answered with its steady, reassuring hum. 6 months after the verdict, the first anniversary arrived on a cold, clear morning. I woke before dawn, pulled on the same suit I'd worn to Kyle's funeral, and walked the full perimeter of the property. The signs were still bright, the wires still sang, the cameras still watched. Everything exactly where it needed to be. At the old cabin I'd fully restored, I poured a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The Fence Line Network inbox had 127 new messages overnight. I answered every one. Some needed lawyers, some just needed to know they weren't alone. One elderly man in Montana wrote, "I'm 82 and they're trying to take my barn because the paint is non-compliant. I saw what you did. Thank you for reminding me old men can still fight. I forwarded his case to Thaddeus with a note. Priority, let's keep that barn standing. Later that afternoon, a familiar white news van rolled up. Lila Vargas stepped out, microphone ready. Mr. Harlan, 1 year later. Any regrets about the fence? I looked straight into the camera. Only one. I wish I'd built it sooner so my brother could have seen it. The segment ran that night. By morning, the donations to the network had tripled. People from 37 states sent checks, stories, and offers to volunteer. We weren't just winning cases anymore, we were changing the conversation. HOAs across the country quietly started revising their most draconian rules. Some even dissolved voluntarily rather than risk the spotlight. But the best moment came on a random Tuesday when a little boy, maybe 8, rode his bike up to the gate with his dad. He pointed at the fence and asked in that solemn kid voice, "Is this the Electric Cowboys fence?" His dad chuckled. "Sure is." The boy stared at me with pure hero worship. "Did you really zap the mean lady?" I crouched down to his level. "I didn't zap anybody, kid. I just reminded some grown-ups that even in America, you can't steal what isn't yours." He nodded like he just received the secret of the universe. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of construction paper. A crayon drawing of a stick figure man next to a fence with lightning bolts shooting out. At the top, in careful block letters, Mr. Harlan Hero. I framed it that same night and hung it on the wall between my military medals and the court verdict. Some nights I still sit on the porch with a beer and watch the moonlight dance across the lake. The fence hums its constant lullaby. Every once in a while a car slows down, windows roll down, and I hear kids whispering, "That's the guy, the one who beat the HOA." I smile into the dark. Because the real victory wasn't the money or the prison sentences or even the demolished mansions. The real victory was proving that quiet patience and a little bit of legal electricity can still beat money, power, and 15 years of unchecked arrogance. Some boundaries aren't drawn with ink on paper. They're drawn with truth, grit, and just enough voltage to make sure the message is felt for a very long time. And some fences, once they're built the right way, will never ever fall. Thanks for staying until the end. If this story made you want to fight for your own backyard, smash that like button. Subscribe so you never miss another HOA takedown. And if you've got your own Karen story, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Now tell me honestly, was the electric fence too far? Or was letting an HOA Karen think she was above the law the real crime all along?